So let's take a closer look at a few things so that we can try to understand if there's any underlying causes that we need to be aware of that drove this complete and total meltdown of the low reverse clutch pack, or if this is a case of Occam's razor where it's just simply hardened, dry rotted seals or sealing rings that resulted in the failure here. Now, unfortunately, we don't know a whole lot about the history of this transmission. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, my customer purchased it from somebody as part of an engine and transmission package, and they told him that the transmission itself was working and driving and operating normally while it and the corresponding engine were in whatever vehicle they were in. So the engine's a 305, and I don't know, I have no idea, but presumably a two-wheel drive passenger car application is what I'm guessing, but I could be wrong about that. Anyway, when we took everything apart, obviously we saw that low reverse was smoked. And so we're trying to figure out if there's anything else we need to be aware of. So we'll go through and take a much closer look at the pump assembly, and we'll also focus on the low reverse clutch. And then once we're done inspecting these parts, I'll bring the case back in and we'll see if there's anything evidence-wise in the case or about the case itself that might lead us to believe that there's something else going on beyond just bad lip seals, okay, or bad square cut seals. Alright, this video will give you a good example of what a bad TH350 pump looks like, because this pump is no good. It has to be replaced in its entirety. Okay, all of these kind of pumps that have the crescent like this in the pump body, the TH350s, 400s, your Ford AODs, C6s, and so forth, all of them are vulnerable to wear here in the crescent area. And when the crescent is worn out as bad as this one is, you're going to have volumetric and or pressure development issues, especially at higher throttle angles or wide open throttle. So when the pump's worn, it's not going to be able to maintain or develop the necessary pressure supply or volume supply to meet the demand being put on the transmission. Okay, the apply circuits are going to be starved for oil at wide open throttle or heavy acceleration. So even in a daily drive, you're just trying to pass somebody on the highway, you might start seeing flare shifting, especially transitioning from second to third gear. So here's the pump, and as you can see in the crescent area, look how worn that is. All right, you got a lot of scoring, even a little flaking. There are some spots where it's actually gouged. All right, and it's like that especially over here, but the wear itself, there's really no part of the surface that's quote-unquote good. All right, we can look at the backside. The backside's not as bad, and I don't know to what extent you could see that, but you're rarely going to have extensive wear in here, but it's very coarse. It's not smooth like it should be. That tells me that there was a ton of particulate matter contaminant, like pieces of metal, passing through the pump gears when this thing was on the road. Alright, you can look at the bushing too. The bushing is worn. Alright, when I picked up my converter from the builder, he told me that the converter that came with this thing was completely trashed, so like totally wiped out. And this thing came out of the jet wash, so it's still got, I guess, a little bit of residual water in there, but it doesn't matter. Like I said, it's not going back in. When you have wear like this, there's only two ways that you can deal with this. One is have it completely gone through and remachined on an end mill. So the end mill will account for the offset that you need for machining of the pocket and then reconditioning the crescent and then sticking oversized gears or thicker gears in there. Okay, that's one way of dealing with it. So if you have access to that type of equipment or you have a machinist that does that, then that's an option for you. The other option is just simply replace the pump with either a good used pump that's in serviceable condition or a remanufactured pump. And you can buy the pump bodies with new gears remanned, or you can buy entire pump assemblies remanned. Now be warned, these are very expensive relative to what they used to cost years ago, and just simply relative to the overall cost of parts for the TH350 when it comes to just overhauling the unit. So this one's no good. and we'll replace it. Just real quick, show you the casting number. Here it is, give you a close-up of that. 6260288. Okay, this body will bolt to any pump cover stator assembly that went into a non-lockup TH350. Okay, 69 to 79 was when the non-lockup variants were in production, and 79 to 84 was when the TH350C was in production. It was a mid-year introduction. I think I said 78 earlier in the video. It's actually 79. So I'll make sure I annotate that, you know, where I meant and talked about the years of introduction for the TH350C, so there's no confusion. But it's 1979, the latter half of that year. Okay. That's it for the pump body. I mean, if your pump body is in good shape, obviously you're going to replace the bushing and the seal. But beyond that, at least for this one, it's no good. And so when you have an issue like this, it's very possible that when in reverse, there was line pressure deficiencies, and over time, that resulted in tremendous amounts of heat being built up in the clutch pack, causing these seals to become hardened due to heat soaking. That is possible. I'm not saying that's the likely cause here. It's possible. Okay? All right, now let's take a look at the gears themselves. Here's the driven gear. So as you see, there's all kind of scoring here. All right, there's scoring on the face of the gear. You have scoring here on the outer diameter. All right, it matches all the scoring you saw on the inner diameter of the pocket on the pump body. Bring that back a little bit into the shot. And then your teeth. The teeth aren't too bad, but there is some wear to them. And then you have your drive gear. Again, not as bad when it comes to scoring on the face. When you start to see wear like this, especially if the pocket gets worn and then the working surface of the pump cover gets worn, your clearances will open up rather significantly. And then if it's really, really pronounced, you'll kind of get what's called deflection, to where there's hard contact being made with the two gears and either working surface or both, and eventually that will cause a breakup of the gears. Usually I see it with the outer gear that goes first and then the inner gear. That didn't happen here, but you know, more than likely this thing would have went you know, belly up and been taken out beforehand due to the failure in low reverse. All right, let's look at the pump cover. So stator, as mentioned earlier, no steady rest, no steel stabilizer sleeve for the direct drum bushing. Okay, so I'm thinking this unit is possibly a 76 or 77 model year. You know, somewhere in that range, maybe 78. The old school selective Babbitt style washer that had the single tab that would go here, I believe that went out of production in 75, and they started introducing the pump bearing and shim setup in 1976. I don't think this unit's been going through. You know, there's nothing in here that leads me to believe that anything might have been done, you know, as far as, you know, overhaul. I mean, everything looks original to me, but I could be wrong about that, and somebody could have gone through it at some point in the past and just used all stock parts that were available at that time. Again, we're going back, you know, 45 years here, 45 plus years, 47 years, whatever. Anyway, so you have your journal here, and you want to look real carefully, especially when you see bushing contact like this. This tells me that there was some oil starvation. In other words, this thing may have been ran low on fluid at multiple junctures, because you have a lot of evidence of hard contact between the bushing and this part of the stator. All right, no damage, no, you know, physical damage, no chunks missing out of it or anything like that. But when you see this, you have a couple of options. One, you can just simply say, you know what, I don't want to deal with it. I'll just replace the stator pump cover. The other option is, if you want to run your fingernail across it vertically like this and you don't feel anything, you just see wear but you don't feel it, then a little bit of sandpaper can straighten this out. And in a stock application, it's going to be fine. In a performance application, I would just opt for a whole new pump. And we're going to install a whole new pump in here anyway, but I'm just saying, if you don't want to, maybe you're on a budget and you're just looking to get the vehicle back on the road, something like this I would call borderline, but you might be able to get away with it without too much issue, as long as the vehicle is not going to see high RPM or the engine is not built making a lot of power. All right, the working surfaces themselves, same kind of deal. The main problem you're going to find with these older pumps is that they're not going to be flat. Okay, they're just not going to be flat anymore. So you can take a straight edge, and the thinnest feeler gauge I have is a 1 thou feeler gauge, but you could take a straight edge and go across the working surface to see if you have some machine work to do or not on the pump to get it flat and true again, or if it'll fly as is. All right, let me locate my 1 thou gauge. I think I have it sticking out here. And this set's kind of temperamental. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can fit this 1 thou feeler gauge underneath. I want to say up to 1/1000 of an inch out is actually acceptable as measured on the bench like this, because when you go to bolt the two halves together, this should flatten out a little bit and you should be okay. That's assuming you're in perfect clearance or even on the minimum side of clearance for the gears and the pump body deck surface. All right, but this is sliding in under relatively easily, as you can see. All right, let me see if I can get it at a little bit better angle so it's more obvious. All right, so as you can see, it's kind of grabbing the straight edge here, but elsewhere it's not. It's sliding right underneath. So this is a 1 thou feeler gauge. I want to see if 1.5 thou will fit under there. Get that to focus or not. So 1.5 thousandths. Let's see if this will slide under, and it will. It's tight here, tight up here. But it's sliding under. I mean, it is making contact with the straight edge. However, in my humble opinion, this surface has to be reconditioned. I would not let it go out the door like this. That's just how I think, or how I feel about it. You may argue with me and say that's fine, and you've built these and you've had them go back on the road and have no issues with a surface like this. I'm not going to dispute you. I would say though 2/1000 of an inch, then I'd push back on that if you're trying to tell me 2 thou is acceptable. 1 thou, like I said, you can probably get away with on a factory application where the pump body is meeting specification in terms of the decks to faces of each gear. That clearance there. All right, so that's the pump. I'm going to get it out of the way. Okay, these are critical cores. So if you go to a transmission part supplier, more than likely they're going to require you to have the core with you before they'll let you take the pump away. In other words, they may not even let you walk out the door with the new one without the core, so they could send it back. Alright, those gears, I mean, they usually don't require you to have the gears, just the two halves themselves. All right, we looked at the low reverse clutch pack. I mean, as you can see, this is completely and totally smoked. I mean, you have your steels, and then you have what used to be frictions but are also now steels. Like I mentioned earlier, you can use these to tighten up your intermediate clutch clearance. Just take off all the inner teeth. You can also cut it in half like I show in one of my other TH350 videos. Somebody had made a comment, I think it might have been on that one, that said, hey, you could just remove all the inner teeth. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right, yeah, I could do that. And that'll drop right in. So the steels are obviously no good. Like nothing in this pack is reusable. The only friction disc that was in any kind of decent shape was this hot friction here. And you know, I mean, it's smoked, it's burnt, but at least there's some friction material left. My converter builder told me something interesting when I mentioned this to him, and he said, you know, first he asked me, has the unit been gone through before? You know, it looked like somebody was inside of it. And I said, not really. It looks stock to me. It looks untouched. And he said, well, if somebody had gone through it and they were, you know, they were a flat rate shop, they may have actually taken the frictions themselves, the ones that they were going to put back in, and stuck them in the jet wash with all the other parts. And they may have stuck the low reverse piston in the jet wash with the seals on it because they had no intention of replacing that, and they just maybe were replacing the frictions in the direct clutch. And so, and I thought that was interesting. You know, I said, you know, yeah, that could be. And he said to me, he said, the reason I asked that is because I've noticed that TH350s, for whatever reason, just, you know, these transmissions in particular, the clutch packs, or excuse me, the clutch discs will completely delaminate. You know, they'll completely wipe if they're subjected to water, and they'll do so almost immediately upon being returned, you know, into the transmission and, you know, back to work again. And I thought that was neat as far as you know, a possible or potential explanation for what we saw, because it would kind of fit, right? You have a very, very hot jet wash, water in the, you know, I guess close to 200 degrees. Could have certainly hardened these sealing rings, or, you know, square cut seals, to the extent that as soon as they got back in the transmission, they just simply failed. And then you had a combination of massive slippage, and then at the same token, the chemical delamination, if you will, or separation of friction material off of the steel underlayment, you know, the steel core of each friction disc. And so maybe somebody went through this thing and they replaced just the direct clutch, and that was it. So here is the direct clutch pack, and there is some wear to it. I mean, you can see there's a big chunk missing out of this. And you see, you know, more extremely excessive wear here. This one looks okay. Steels look okay for the most part. We're going to put a whole new steel module in here. I would not trust these steels regardless, given what I've seen. TH350s, you really don't need to reuse the steels. The steel modules are relatively inexpensive. I mean, you know, the incremental cost compared to the total cost of everything you're buying to overhaul the unit is very insignificant, in my opinion. Okay, some wear on the intermediates. All right, nothing overly remarkable, but there is definitely some wear. So the band itself, you have some pitting here on the band. Anytime you see pitting like this, that leads me to believe that somehow moisture or water got in here, or was subjected to moisture or water. And that could tell me that the case was not efficiently venting moisture like it should. So we have to scrutinize the little vent tube area to make sure that it's functioning the way it should be. Because when transmission sits, you know, vehicle sits not being used, especially if it sits for a while, like it's only a part-time vehicle, If you live in an area that's not really super arid like where I live, which is most everybody watching this, you're going to live in either a semi-arid or you're going to live in a non-arid climate. Moisture is going to collect in the transmission. It's going to collect in the engine too. And when the vehicle goes back on the road and everything gets to operating temperature, all of that moisture is going to boil off. And it has to be able to escape the case. And when we're talking about the transmission, it has to be able to escape the case. And the vent tube is primarily where it escapes. So if that vent tube isn't working correctly, you take apart a transmission, it looks like it's got some rust, it looks like there is water or there is pitting or whatever the case may be, rust spots here and there. You want to scrutinize your vent tube and make sure that it's not clogged or plugged or whatever. Because otherwise, when the thing goes back on the road, you're going to have the recurrence of the same problem, and that's obviously no good. Okay, a quick look at the piston itself. I don't see any obvious signs of structural integrity issues, nothing that would concern me. I mean, you sometimes will see cracks here on the top portion, and when I say sometimes, like I'm talking very, very, very rarely. I shouldn't use the word sometimes here. That's not exactly correct. Every once in a great while, I'll see one of these bad, and that's usually due to either water getting into the case, causing all the related issues, or it's just a structural integrity problem with that particular piston. I think I've seen it one time in all the TH350s I've done. Not that I've done a huge amount of them, and there's folks that have done more of these in 1 year I've probably done in my lifetime, but the numbers I have been through, I've only seen it once, and it was just a little tiny hairline fracture in this somewhere along the piston, this general area. Okay, center support. This is an area of weakness in TH350, so if you're doing anything high performance, you want to put a 4L60E center support in with the new 4L60E Borg-Warner low roller one-way clutch assembly, and that will kind of proactively address a potential failure point, because if this fails, you're not going to have any movement in forward. I mean, it's done. And I'd say 1 out of every 10 of these that I've seen has a broken or failed rolled over low roller assembly. Okay, the 4L60E center support, or a center support from I think 87 or 88 and up in the 700 R4s, will drop right in, no modifications necessary. Okay, you don't need to machine the thing, you don't need to do any grinding, you don't need to modify the case in any way, you just drop it in and it's done. Okay, for high performance, just use a case saver there instead of a traditional anti-clunk spring, and you'll be good to go. Alright, direct drum, we'll just take a quick peek at it, since we looked at the portion of the stator where that bushing goes. As we can see, there is fairly significant damage here to the bushing. Alright, there are wider bushings that you can install. Okay, this one's relatively narrow, and that's how they used to be. Also, make sure that there is no sealing ring grooves cut. If you could feel it, then I'd replace it, and I can actually feel this. So we're going to replace this direct drum as well. So you see that? And again, this is not something that is very easy to catch when you're first taking the trans down, because it's saturated with nasty fluid. You may be able to see if it's really bad, and you may be able to feel it if it's really pronounced. I could feel these. It's very subtle, but I could feel them. So this drum's no good. I have another one that I'll put in here. Alright, I already looked at everything else off camera. There's nothing that I think warrants closer scrutiny. We're going to replace this with a Sonic's heavy-duty outer roller clutch race and a brand new low roller assembly. I'm sorry, a brand new intermediate roller assembly. There's 2 one-way clutches in here on the TH350, the intermediate and the low roller. For a factory application, you can reuse the center support and install a new low roller clutch. It should be fine, but anything more than that, I would recommend 4L60E center support with the that low roller clutch. Not necessarily upgraded, it is just upgraded relative to the one that's in the TH350. All right, now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clear some of this stuff out of the way. We're gonna bring the case back in here. The case is not necessarily clean, ready for reassembly. There's still some cleanup work I have to do with it, but it's clean enough so we can at least look at it a bit closer and determine if there's anything else we need to do other than finish cleaning it. All right, taking a closer look at the case. I have the accumulator bore for the 1.2 in front of the camera, and let me zoom in a little bit. So the reason why I'm looking at this a little bit more closely is because we had a broken 1.2 accumulator spring, again fairly common with these. You just want to make sure that no parts of that broken spring came in contact with the bore here. So you have an outer bore and you have an inner bore, and that's where sealing rings ride on the little piston. Okay, so here's your piston. I haven't had a chance to clean it yet, but if the bores here scored up, then obviously you're going to have a real problem in the intermediate clutch apply circuit, which the accumulator circuit is really a sub-circuit within the broader clutch circuit. So if you have leaks here, you're going to slip from 1 to 2. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to reposition the camera. We'll zoom out and we'll take a closer look at the governor bore where we have that repair sleeve or bushing in there, and we'll check that out. Okay, whenever you have an excessively worn bore, the case needs to be sleeved and a bushing installed, or a repair sleeve, whatever you want to call it. And so what we want to do is assess the condition of this sleeve and make sure that it's not scored or gouged or otherwise not serviceable. Okay, now if you have very, very minor scoring, what you can do is just clean it up with like some 800 and then 1000 and then maybe 12 to 1500 grit sandpaper, and that will restore the condition without taking off any excessive amount of material that would otherwise cause a problem, like in terms of governor pressure loss in this area. Okay, like I said, this thing, I pulled it out of the jet wash not more than about a half hour ago. I just wanted to clean it for the purposes of doing this part of the video. Beyond that, we have a whole bunch of dirt here. We have dirt on the bell housing. There's caked dirt on the other side. You know, it's not ready to be built on, but it is clean enough to do an inspection, and that's all I care about for now. All right, you want to take a look at your guide pin for your gear. Okay, so let me see if I could reposition the case so you can actually see what I'm talking about. And you probably already know, but still it helps being able to see it. All right, just make sure that this little gear, this little pin is not somehow damaged, scored up, bent. All right, that's really it. That's all you're looking at. Okay, you have a rear case bushing in here. That's going to be replaced, but you want to double check the bushing and the journal to see if there's any unusual wear patterns, which could lead you to believe that there was a low fluid condition in the transmission. I think this transmission ran low, a little bit low on fluid. I don't know how severe it was. A telltale sign that you have low fluid is like bushings that are wiped to the point where some of them are falling out, as well as valve body to spacer plate and spacer plate to case gaskets that are bonded to either the spacer plate and or the case. When you see that, that's a good indicator that the fluid was ran low or the transmission otherwise overheated severely. Okay, and then next you want to check your modulator valve bore. Make sure it's not scored up. If it is, bench buddies for mild stuff. If it's really, really bad, and no matter what you do, no matter what valve goes back in there, it's going to have issues, then you're looking at a case, having to find another case. So I don't know if there's any kind of repair sleeves for this. I don't think there is, but I could be wrong. I know there is for the 1.2 accumulator board. It's called a case saver, and Sonics makes it. And I don't know if there is one for the modulator, or modulator valve, I should say. All right, I'm gonna flip it back over. Okay, recall that this was very tough coming out. I had to smack it out with a hammer and a screwdriver. That is not all that common. Sometimes this board will get ever so slightly out of round, or there'll be crud on the selector itself. I didn't see anything on the selector that would lead me to believe that there was a problem there. But it does have some gouge marks now that it's cleaned off. So we'll be putting a new one of these in here too. So selector, pump, direct drum, and intermediate roller assemblies, outer race. Those are the hard parts that this thing is going to receive. And then soft part wise, it will receive it'll receive a whole new clutch and steel module, band, new governor gear, new one-way clutch assemblies for the intermediate and the low roller. We're also going to do a Sonics boost valve and sleeve. That's a upgraded version of what goes into the valve body from the factory. On all these old units like this, I like to make sure that I upgrade that area. Now that I have the vent area exposed, or the port exposed, all I'm doing here is looking. In fact, let me shine a flashlight. I'm just looking to see if there's any interference with my light. Okay, this is a relatively simple circuit. It just goes in here and bends to the left at a 90-degree angle so that can kind of interface with the corresponding port on the pump cover. And that's basically your vent. And TH350s are usually not issues. I see them every once in a while with 700R4s or even the 4L60Es that don't have the hose coming out from the vent tube itself, where crud will be allowed to get in, especially if it's an off-road vehicle. All right, what else? Thrust washer kit, bearings. We're going to do bearings and thrust washers in here. Again, I don't know, it was low on fluid, but the conditions inside the case lead me to believe a lot of heat was sustained, especially in the low reverse and or rear of the case. And this is a small case, so any heat back there will not obviously migrate everywhere in the barrel of the case. So we'll do that. So overhaul kit, which is paper and rubber, fiber, steels, complete bushing kit, bearings, thrust washers, aforementioned Sonics boost valve, aforementioned hard parts, one-way clutch assemblies, a drive and a driven gear for the speedometer, a new governor gear, and new 1.2 accumulator spring, given that the other one's no good. But you always want to replace those springs even if your spring is fine. I just don't, I don't take the chance. Okay. All right, that should about do it. I'm going to conclude that just because of the absence of information and knowledge of the history of this thing, both between myself and my customer, we know very little. I'm going to conclude that there was nothing about the case itself or nothing that we haven't seen that could have caused the low reverse clutch to fail like that. I think it's a case of hardened sealing rings, or seals, D-cut seals, square cut seals, rubber, whatever the hell you want to call them, got hard, possibly due to either overheating and wear, kind of a positive feedback loop, or if my converter builder's correct, somebody has been through this thing to replace one clutch pack, maybe two. They literally washed the other frictions that they were going to reuse in the jet wash and hot tank or something, and they put them back in. They put all of the old lip seals and square cut seals on the low reverse piston back in like that after washing them, and it just failed subsequently shortly thereafter. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions, comments, go ahead and leave them below. Hopefully this was helpful for you, and you learned something.